Hello and welcome back, and I'm going to continue with some thoughts on deep order mathematics, and in particular I want to look at the equations for stagnation and for dynamic growth. Now both these equations really are an outcome of the equations for the physical, vital, mental and integral, and over the last couple of weeks what we've done is we've derived enhanced equations for the physical, vital, mental and integral that show both the patterns and the conditions for growth implicit in them, and I want to create a generalized form of those equations here and then derive the equations for stagnation and growth from that generalized equation. So we had looked at an equation for the physical, an equation for the vital, an equation for the mental, and an equation for the integral. I'm going to represent this just by x, and obviously x can be either the physical or the vital or the mental or the integral. Now the generalized form is going to basically parallel the forms that we had for each of these four equations. So if you recall, each of these equations, the key components, there were four components that basically showed the untransformed level, the level behind the untransformed level, which is the signature or the essence of the organization, the layer behind that, which is about the architecture of forces from which the signature derives its uniqueness, and then the layer behind the architecture of forces, which is about the implicit point that's prevalent in the system and that has four deep characteristics ingrained in it. So that level at the point we represented by M3, we represented the architectural forces by M2, the uniqueness or the signature by M1, and the outer by the letter untransformed, U for untransformed. And the general form that we had for each of these equations, for instance M3, which again deals with the deep characteristics implicit in any point in a system, we had a general form for an equation that we were calling omni something, and here I'm going to represent this by omni seed of x. So if x is the physical, then omni is really about omnipresence. If x is the vital, it's about omnipower. If x is the mental, it's about omniscience. If x is integral, then it's about omnilove. So we had a generalized equation, and I'm just going to represent it in this form. At meta level 2, where again this deep characteristic implicit in the point becomes a set of architectural forces, we had represented those architectural forces by a generalized set, and here I'll represent that generalized set again by seed of x. And at meta level 1, which was then a unique combination of the forces from the layer of architectural forces that then defines the unique signature of an organization, what we have is a generalized equation signature at the base x, and then the untransformed layer, which is the layer on the surface and where the work kind of begins. And what we've seen is that it tends to have a lot of opposite characteristics from the ones that are implicit and in the deeper set of meta level 2. So I'll just represent that by x untransformed. And this is a generalized equation, the details of which vary depending on whether we're looking at the physical, vital, mental or integral. And we had also said that another key component of this equation is something we're calling a transformation function, a transformation circle. It's a function that brings about the integration, if you will, of these four layers over time. And the way that it does that is that there has to be an overcoming of the patterns of the untransformed layer here. If this happens, then something of the dynamics of the layer of the signature become more active in the untransformed level. Similarly, if the signature approaches or becomes a force, then we break from M1 to M2, and something of the dynamics of M2 become active in the untransformed layer, therefore further transforming it. And if F becomes impersonal, then we break from M2 to M3, and then something of M3 begins to incarnate in the untransformed layer. As a result of these various incarnations or deeper dynamics embedding themselves in the untransformed or outer layer, what we begin to see is a movement towards a transformed set X. And this is how we had represented, if you will, the generalized equation for the physical, vital, mental integral. Now, the key point here is that if we think about what is it that brings about the dynamics here, so if nothing's happening with the transformation circle function, then we are going to continue forever in the untransformed outer layer, and the characteristics that we encounter in the untransformed layer are going to continue. And so we represent that mathematically, very simply, as saying that dTcx, so what we're saying here is that basically the rate of change of the transformation circle, if that is negative or equal to 0, then we know we have the conditions for stagnation. So things are then going to continue as they are in the untransformed outer layer. However, on the flip side, if we are seeing these shifts so that we're able to overcome the patterns and meet the conditions so that each subsequent deeper layer can become active in the outer, then transformation circle continues. And as a quick reminder, the transformation circle we had represented as a seed, with M3 being the deepest level, surrounded by M2, surrounded by M1, surrounded by the untransformed or outer. And we had said that this is subject to a time function such that over time there's more and more of an integration of the inner and outer layers, such that there's the sinusoidal function that grows at the rate of E and is bound by pi, and therefore we had said that this Tc itself is modulated by sine E pi. But the key thing here is that so long as this action is going on, so long as patterns are being overcome and conditions are being met, then growth, sustainable dynamic growth, is what results. And we represent that very simply by this equation, that the rate of change of this transformation circle over time is greater than 0. So ultimately, the equations for stagnation and dynamic growth are simply represented by these differential equations, where the rate of change of Tc over x is less than or equal to 0 indicates stagnation, rate of change greater than 0 indicates dynamic growth.